Okay, AP US History, Chapter 1 of American Pageant. This is new for the class. In an attempt to get everybody familiarized with Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, which we do not go over in class, I created these two videos for 1 and Chapter 2 to help you out a little bit as we venture into the class. You will be responsible for Chapter 1 and 2, even though we don't cover it. It will be on the first test, which will encompass chapters 1 through 4. So you could, go over and listen to this, obviously, but more importantly, I won't say more importantly, but just as important would be for you to read all of Chapter 1 and all of Chapter 2, which is a must in this class. You don't want to get behind. So that being said, I'm doing this to help you out. It's going to be rough around the edges because it's the first time I've done it, but I'll do my best to impart all my knowledge on you as I will the entire year. So let's get going. Chapter 1. Chapter 1 in American Pageant is lays the groundwork for obviously the rest of the book. It's the New World Beginnings. That's the title of Chapter 1. So normally I don't put too much emphasis on 1 and 2, but recently, I think it was 2 years ago, there was a document-based question on the AP exam that had dealt with the Aztecs, Incas, and Mayas, and we just briefly went over that. So I felt pretty bad about it. So I'm making sure that we cover all bases. So first off, I want to start by telling you that goes way, 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 way back in history when 250 million years ago, there was a gigantic continent known as Pangaea. All continents were connected. We have a lot of proof of that, but the most obvious proof is the puzzle that exists. That if you look at say South America and Africa, you can easily see where the two fit together, and doesn't take much to figure that out. But also we have similar species in lakes and rivers, fauna, plant and animal life, very similar on to the Western Hemisphere and the East and the Eastern Hemisphere. So that gives you a lot of proof that at one point all the continents were together. Now, what happened to them is they started drifting apart. It's called continental drift. It's something they'll probably cover more in a science class, but the continents are moving inches per year away from each other. The bottom here, the map shows you, if you're patient, you'll see that the continents will move away from each other. That happened over millions of years. So it's very, very small movements, but the continents are drifting away from each other. So that's where we're at this point on the bottom, the present day. That's where the continents exist, and it's pretty easy to wrap your head around the fact that all the continents were together if you look at the bottom. The Ice Age. Let's talk about the importance of the Ice Age in American history. It's how people got on the Western Hemisphere. By Western Hemisphere, I mean North America, Central America, and South America. On the map here, you can see it on the left. At one point, there was nobody in the Americas. Not a soul was in the Americas. It was simply animals and plant life. Life was said to begin somewhere in Africa or Asia. They haven't pinpointed exactly where. And somehow people got over to North America, Central America, South America, the Western Hemisphere. And it wasn't by boat because people were too primitive at the time to construct a boat. So really what it was, what scientists have narrowed it down to is the Ice Age. That at one point the Earth was encompassed by so much ice because we were in a cooling period that the ice came all the way down to, present day Oregon, Washington, maybe even a little bit into California where we live. And the same thing was happening all around the top of the world, or the top of the earth, and then all along the bottom too. So it was very, very cold. Living in Salinas like we do now, the climate would have been much different. It snowed a lot of the time. Snow probably didn't remain on the ground year round, but there were times when it was very thick. There's said to have been a mile of ice over New York City. That's how far down the ice came. So what that caused was a land bridge to form at the Bering Strait. the closest distance between the two, the Eastern Hemisphere and the Western Hemisphere, is the Bering Strait. Deadliest Catch is filmed up there today. So obviously we know it's not ice, it's water now because we're in a warming trend. The ice has melted. But when it was cold, that's people drifted across. So technically speaking, the first person to walk across the land bridge was the direct discoverer of America. We call him an indirect discoverer of America today because we give Columbus credit for that, as correct or incorrect as that might be. So the first person in class, I called him the player because he's everybody's daddy. He walked across, probably chasing after food. It was a woolly mammoth maybe that he was chasing after, and he was trying to sustain life. So he walked across without knowing that he discovered a new land, but nonetheless, he came across, and then thousands and thousands and thousands of years later, people spread all the way out in North America, and it got this down in South America and all the way to the tip of South America. And the Earth warmed, the ice melted, and goodbye to the land bridge. The land bridge was gone. What's interesting now is that we could study people who existed in North, Central, and South America, and also people who existed in Africa and Europe and Asia. They didn't know about each other. They existed separately, and we could study both. And then that's where what comes into play is, well, who's the first person to actually travel over? Columbus is given credit for that in 1492 when he mistakenly traveled to the Americas. So we'll get into that as we go. In 1492, when Columbus did do that, the known world in 1492 is in purple. That's what they knew about. They had no idea about the Americas, the Western Hemisphere. They are going to find out, but not by Columbus. Columbus is going to die not knowing that he discovered a new world. Glacial evidence. We know that glaciers did exist. It's the evidence is plain to see. You could see U-shaped valleys here. Those valleys used to be covered in ice. There used to be mountains in those areas, but ice knocked down mountains and left their trace. Lakes, like the Great Lakes, are carved out. The water in the Great Lakes was melted snow and ice. So there is evidence. You could see it. You just have to be aware. This picture is of Yosemite. You could see Half Dome in the background. You look at this picture here, and you could see U-shaped valleys in there that were carved out by the glaciers. And here you could see the retreating of the glaciers. We're in a warming trend right now. This is 1948 on the left, 2002 in the middle, and 2006. And I imagine if you looked at it in 2016, there'd be no snow or ice there at all because we're in that warming trend. And because scientists do think that we're speeding up that warming trend by gases the carbon monoxide gas that we give off from vehicles and the ruining of the ozone, which is heating up the planet, may be contributing to the melting of the ice even faster than it already is. Another kind of cool picture here of a U-shaped valley, which was once snow and ice. The Bering Strait, here's a picture here, or a map that shows you where the first nomadic settlers, hunter-gatherers, were crossing and just were following the food. Hunter-gatherers, that's what hunter-gatherer societies do. I found some cool pictures online of people who live up at the Bering Strait now. They live like that, kind of a little bit of a different existence than we do here in California. Okay, so let's talk about some of the different tribes that existed. So now we're going to back up and we're going to look at what the Western Hemisphere was like after the initial settlers came over. They separated out. You've got Native Americans who live in the North, in North America, in Central America, and in South America. Some were more fortunate than others. Native Americans that lived in, let's say, Arizona in the hot desert had a tougher life. Indians that lived in the, say, Rocky Mountains or in the Dakotas, life was tough. Californian Indians probably had it a little bit easier, just like we have it easier. Now, if overall, though, Native Americans that lived in South and Central America, places like Mexico and Peru, they had it easier because it's temperate weather, long growing seasons, abundance of fish and wildlife, fertile soil. So life was much simpler for them. It always confuses my students because the first thing they think of when I ask them the question of who had it better, Native Americans that lived in present day United States or Native Americans that lived in present day South America or Central America. And of course, we being so self-centered want to say that Native Americans that lived in the present day United States would have had it easier, which is incorrect. The Aztecs, Mayas, and Incas all came from South and Central America. They had advanced societies. They created civilizations. They had cultures. The way that they did things every day, a culture. They were high tech and they were stable societies. They were farmers. They were thinkers. They created calendars and they created an alphabet and they studied the stars and the moon and the sun. All these kind of cool things that they were able to do because they knew where their next meal was coming from. If you're an Indian that lived in North America, you didn't know where your next meal was going to come from. And all they could think about was making sure that they sustained life and followed the food wherever it went. So they weren't stable in North America, but in South and Central America, they were, interestingly enough. The three most advanced tribes, as I said, the Aztecs, Incas, and Mayas. The Aztecs lived in present-day Mexico. They were warlike. They built a huge society. They built an empire. They took over territory. They defeat other tribes and take over their land and force the prisoners of war to become slaves or fight for them so they could take over still more territory. They found gold in the rivers in the area and the mountains and the rivers, and to them it was a novelty. It was a cool thing that they used for decoration, but when the Europeans came, they couldn't believe how much gold was there. So the Aztecs were probably the most advanced. You see some of the early Aztec art, and their capital was at Tenochtitlan. It was a floating city. They dug out a huge moat all around it, and they built a capital city here with gold in the walls, and they had drawbridges to protect them from attack. It was an amazing capital. The technology that it took to build it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. Tenochtitlan, their capital. You can see some of their architecture here as well. Let's talk a little bit about the Incas. The Incas lived in the northern part of South America. They had a system of roads. They had an organized society. They too found a lot of gold. They were organized and thrived in this area. Eventually, it's those roads that the Europeans are going to come and they're going to take and they're going to get after their gold, and they're going to take those roads and they're going to attack the Incas. But for a long time, the Incas were strong in that territory. Machu Picchu, the lost city of the Incas, city that they built. The third group we'll talk here about are the Mayas. The Mayans ruins located in Central America. Amazing architecture here. You could see people walking up and down those steps. You can't do that today, as you shouldn't be able to. One, it's dangerous, and two, wearing away at these ruins that were built hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and they're still standing today. The demise of the Mayans, it's unknown as to what happened with the Mayans. They disappeared. They don't know if it's lack of leadership. Maybe their leaders died off. Maybe it was famine, natural disaster. For whatever reason, the Mayans died out. Actually died out before the Incas and the Aztecs were around. As I said before, Indians living in North America, where it's present-day United States, had it tough. Just think of all the areas in America. We've been able to overcome and adapt to the cold weather or the hot weather, the snow and the ice and all those things. We've been able to overcome that. It's a tribute to us, but it's a harsh environment. So North American Indian tribes back during this time, before 1492, had a tough life. And they generally grew corn, maize, Three Sisters farming you'll read about. They were low-tech hunter-gatherers, chasing their food wherever they went. The most well-known of the tribes was the Iroquois. They were probably the most advanced tribes when it came to, at least when it came to North American Indian tribes. They were the most advanced. They were nothing even close to the Aztecs, Mayans, and Incas, but they were advanced for North America as far as North American Indians go. They had a matrilineal culture, which means the power and possessions are passed down on the female side. Almost every other society, including ours, it's the male side. They had democracy. They voted on things. They formed unions with other tribes, and they took care of each other. They were the closest thing to the Aztecs, Mayas, and Incas without actually being those tribes. The Iroquois League was really a group of these tribes made up of the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, and the Tuscarora. They spoke the same language. They formed democratic governments, and they watched out for each other. They formed what's known as alliances. And it's located in present-day New York, is where the Iroquois Indians were predominantly. Another adaptation here, we've done a great job as a society of adapting to the weather and to the conditions, but here's an example back during this time before Columbus. The Pueblo Indians, located in the Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. Here's a great example of adaptation. The Pueblo had to, the tough thing was how hot it was. They had to make sure that they're in a shaded area because it was so hot. It was really cold at night. This protects them from the cold. It also protects them from attack. You could see that it's tucked under this mountain, and it's really, you can't see it. They'd have ladders that would go up to the top floor where they'd sleep at night. They'd pull the ladders up so they wouldn't be attacked. So protection and adaptation was big for North American Indian tribes. There's a little closer view at that. Kind of cool. Okay, let's get into some of the indirect discoverers of America. There's obviously we're gonna assume that you know that the direct discoverer of America would be Columbus, although he probably wasn't the first even European to reach North America, but we'll get into that. The original Native American, the player I called him, who came across the Bering Strait, you got to give that guy some credit for being the direct discoverer of America. The Vikings who came over before that, the Crusaders, the birth of nation states, Marco Polo, Gutenberg's printing press, Prince Henry School for navigators, all could be contributors to it, and you'll understand what I'm talking about as we go on. So give some credit to the first guy walking across the player. We know we've already talked about that. The Vikings supposedly, I'm not going to read all that to you. The Vikings supposedly came over about 500 years before. It was Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red, who came over from Norway, and they crossed over to Greenland, to Iceland, and on to what they called Vinland at the time, which is in Canada today. There have been found what they think are artifacts that belong to the Vikings and belong to Leif Erikson, but they didn't write anything down, so we can't give them direct credit for being there. We're not 100% positive, but probably in the 90-something percentile that they were there before Columbus was, but they just didn't write anything down or report anything. As much as a series of wars, the Crusades could be given credit for being an indirect discoverer of America. I'll explain to you why that is. The Crusades series of wars over Jerusalem, fight between the Muslims and the Christians. For our purposes, that's not what we're going to get into and talk about. What we will talk about is there was a whole bunch of nation states all over Europe. There was no such thing as France and England and Italy and those places. They came about later. From your world history studies, you may understand and know about feudalism. There were feudalistic societies all throughout Europe, and people were afraid to leave manors. Their manor, which was a self-contained, walled community that they lived in. You had serfs who were working. The lord ran the manor, and people were just afraid to venture out. That's going to change when the Pope comes and asks a lot of these lords to let him rent, I guess you could say, or borrow the serfs so they could go fight for the Holy Land. And they did. And those people who went over there to fight, they went east and they saw all kinds of cool things like spices and different kinds of like gold. And the spices were really, really good. Made meat that was spoiled taste better, and obviously the value of gold. They're seeing things that they'd never seen before. They came back and told stories about how wonderful things were, and it piqued people's interest. Europe is in a period known as the Dark Ages. They were doing nothing. They were exploring nothing. They were on sleepy manors, and they refused to go out or do anything. This changed everything. So once that happened, stories went around, and pretty soon kings emerged, lords knocked down their walls and took over the manor next door because they wanted more power and they wanted more money. And the way to get that, they figured out, was to send people out in search of gold. Gold was huge. Gold is huge. So these manors were the system of manors, and feudalism was ended, and it led to the rise of nation states. Portugal, Spain, France, and Germany, and kings that wanted more power. So they're sending people out to get and one of them just happened to, mistakenly, Columbus, back into the Western Hemisphere. Okay, let's talk about Marco Polo. Marco Polo wrote a book called The Book of Sir Marco Polo, where he talked about his journey, where he left, and he was over 20 years traveling east, looking at what was going on, and coming back and telling stories and writing in his book about how wonderful things are over there. Kings later on read the book and sent more people out to explore. So one guy, an Italian explorer, Marco Polo, came back with stories, and the word's going to get out that there's a lot of great things if you go east. So they wanted to send more explorers out. Not very many people read the book of Sir Marco Polo because you had to handwrite the copy if you wanted to make a copy for somebody, until Gutenberg in 1455 invented the printing press. That changed everything. Now you can mass produce books. We'll talk in class about how this worked. Not too difficult, but it was very primitive, the first printing press, but you can sure as heck print 100 copies of page one really quickly. Then once you're finished with that, you could print 100 copies of page two, and so on and so forth till you finish the book, and then you have 100 copies in the end. The price of books went down, information went out, kings got fired up, kings are desperate for more money, and they send explorers out. But many of these explorers didn't know about sailing. Education comes into play. When you want to learn about something, obviously books. There are now books available at this point, but Prince Henry School for Navigators. Prince Henry was from Portugal. Portugal took the lead in sending people out, venturing out, sending sailors out. He taught them about the winds, the tides. They invented a ship called a caravel, which would go against the wind. They invented a compass because they were so afraid of sea monsters, and they were afraid of getting lost at sea, like so many explorers early on were just lost at sea. They lost their way, they got confused, and they were never to be heard or seen again, and probably died in the middle of the ocean somewhere. And obviously, that petrified sailors. They were so afraid of it. But once they got to work in school, in Prince Henry School for the Navigators, they got the word out, and they were figuring out how to sail. So they were venturing out even more. Two students that are most well known from Prince Henry School for Navigators are the two Portuguese sailors, one by the name of Diaz, one by the name of da Gama. And here's their contribution to history. You had, first off, Bartholomew Diaz was the first to reach the tip of Africa. Earlier I showed you the map of the known world at the time. They knew Africa about halfway down. No one had ventured to the bottom of Africa. They're trying to get to the east to go get all that gold and all the things that are out there that they're fired up about. Walking across just didn't cut it. It was too hard to carry all this gold and silk. Silk was another thing that was really sought after in Europe. The Italians had a monopoly over trade. And to break the Italian trade monopoly, they wanted an all-water route to Asia. which they could then fill their ship full of silk and gold and spices and turn around and go back and then make money hand over fist. So Diaz is searching for the tip of Africa because he knows if he could reach the tip of Africa, he could go all the way around, because he assumed that the world was round and that he wouldn't sail off the edge like so many sailors were afraid of earlier. So it took him a long time. He went back and forth trying to reach the tip, because the further he went, he'd get more afraid, and obviously they'd run out of supplies. But then finally, in 1480, it was 1486 when Diaz reached the tip of Africa and then turned around and came back because he ran out of supplies. It wasn't until 1497 when Vasco da Gama sailed all the way around. He went all the way around. So not 1497, and you know that's after Columbus set sail as well. So Portugal was pretty sure that they actually refused to finance Columbus's journey, because they had already had somebody, Diaz, who reached the tip of Africa, and they knew that they can get to Asia with an all-water route. So they actually refused Columbus. He wanted them to pay for his journey. Okay, so all these different trade routes. They call it Columbian exchange for obvious reasons after Columbus. The trade between North America and Africa and Europe, and mostly Europe and North America, it's called Columbian trade because of Columbian exchange, because of Columbus. But you could see all the different trade routes. In red, you see that's the northern route. Mostly it was the Italians that were dominating trade there. But then the blue shows you da Gama going all the way around. Once they did that, they had successfully broken the Italian monopoly over trade. And by doing that, Portugal is going to make a lot of money, and it's going to emerge as a world power temporarily. Spain and Portugal were the two world powers at the time. So let's talk more about Christopher Columbus and his journey. He had an interesting thought. Columbus said, "I truly believe that the earth is a lot smaller than it is, and that I think you could sail west to get to the east." So he thinks that the whole Diaz going all the way down to the tip of Africa, that was too far, way too far. So he says, "I think you could sail west, go to the east, and get there faster." What he didn't know is how big the earth is. And what he didn't know was that a big landmass blocked his way. So first, Christopher Columbus, who was Italian, but Italy wouldn't finance his journey because they don't want an all-water route. They dominate trade in Europe for silk. So next he went to Spain. Spain initially said no, and then he went to Portugal. Portugal said no, sorry, we're already here. We know we can get to Asia. We found an all-water route. So he went back to Spain, and Spain said yes the second time. Ferdinand and Isabel gave him his ships, 3 ships, and men, and they took a cut of whatever he found. He left Spain August 3rd, 1492, and he was on his way. And, the miscalculations, as I said, the Columbian miscalculations, underestimating the size of the world and didn't know that a massive land mass was in the way. So if you look at this map right here, North America, Central America, and South America block Columbus's route to Asia. And he doesn't know that. He does land in Hispaniola, in the what's today called the West Indies. He thinks he's in the East Indies, and if you look straight across in the blue area, there's some islands off there that are the East Indies, and Columbus believes that he's there. He makes a mistake, a massive mistake, and then he spends a lot of time the next 3 or 4 years looking for the cities in Asia and in places like China where he could find this silk and gold, and dies in prison for mistreatment of Native Americans. Columbus's mistreatment of Native Americans, we'll talk more about that in class, but he leave it at that right now. He mistreated the Native Americans, and we'll get into more of that as we go. So that, and when Queen found out about that, they put him in jail, and he died a defeated man without ever knowing that he reached the Americas. Okay, so at this point, You have two world powers that are vying for power, right? They each want to have more power. Two Catholic countries at the time, Portugal and Spain. So they ask the Pope to figure out what to do. And the Pope drew an imaginary line. You can see on this map right here. The imaginary line, he had no idea what was out there at the time because it's in 1494. And, they didn't know. In 1494, Columbus believed that he reached Asia. They don't know the Americas are there. So the Pope draws that line, and the line is the dotted line you could see right there. And he said that Spain gets all land east of that, all land west of the line, and Portugal gets all land east of the line. Well, if you look at the land east of the line at the time, it was all discovered. The land west of the line wasn't. So Spain is going to benefit from the Treaty of Tordesillas that the Pope drew, the imaginary line. And they're going to send explorers. And what happens is they send all their explorers west. Portugal sends all their explorers to the east. And there you have it. The Americas are going to be discovered by the Spanish, and they're going to dominate history for the next 100 years. And Portugal is going to drop off the face of the earth as a world power. It was Amerigo Vespucci who was the one who found out that Columbus didn't reach Asia. He sailed around some of the places where Columbus was originally, and he said, man, Columbus did not find Asia. This is new territory. But of course, you could see the red here, the not the dotted red, but the red line there. You could see where Amerigo Vespucci's searching around, and that's the area that he searched. He doesn't know how high above, how far North America goes, or how far South America goes. Really limited in their knowledge of what's out there. But they do know one thing, that there's a piece of land there that blocked Columbus from getting to Asia. And they got to try to figure it out from there. So Amerigo Vespucci, given credit for that. That's why America is called America. And it was Balboa who ventured across the Isthmus of Panama. How lucky was that? Balboa picked the closest distance between the Atlantic and the Pacific to walk across. He did, and he found the South Sea. So putting two and two together, I'll go back to this map right here. What they know now is that there's a landmass that blocks their way. They don't know how big the landmass is, but they found the ocean on the other side. And they're assuming that somewhere around there is going to be some kind of passage through to get to the South Sea that Balboa had discovered. So starting to put two and two together about what's out there. Ferdinand Magellan, talk about this Portuguese explorer sailing for the Spanish because he wanted to go west. He wanted to complete the journey of Christopher Columbus. All right, that's what Magellan wanted to do. Complete the journey of Christopher Columbus. He wanted to sail west to get to the east. Portugal didn't want to finance this journey, but Spain did. They gave him 5 ships, 250 men, and said, go for it. This map tells you a lot. You could see here I guess it's purple, Magellan leaving Spain and venturing out. And you could see he goes south of where Amerigo Vespucci went, and he's going in and out of each bay, looking for a passage or a strait or a river that goes all the way through. Never finds it until he gets all the way to the bottom, to what today is called the Strait of Magellan. He loses a ship before that to mutiny. They can't believe how long it was taken. He loses a ship in the strait to shipwreck, and then he comes out in the Pacific Ocean. It was called the South Sea at the time. It's what Balboa discovered, and it was calm as opposed to the awful conditions in the strait, which took him almost a month to get through. The weather was so bad, rocky, nasty weather. Once he gets to the Pacific Ocean or South Sea, he named it Pacific Ocean, which is peaceful. And then he said, any day now we're going to find Asia. And those of you who know a lot about geography know that it's not going to be any day. It's going to take him a really, really long time. So he kept sailing and sailing and sailing. Another ship turned around, so now he's down to 2 ships that are left. He finally did get on, find an island where he could resupply. Columbus and his men then hooked up with a tribe in the Philippines and fought with them. Probably shouldn't have done that. The other tribes didn't like that. Anyways, Magellan was killed, but his ship, one ship led by Juan del Caño, and a small number of men did make it back. They circumnavigated the world. They became the first ever to circumnavigate or go all the way around the world. Some of the contributions of the Magellan voyage, even though he didn't make this all the way, he died beforehand, proved that the world was round. They know that 100% now. Proved there was no passage through South America. Proved the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. Proved the vastness of the planet, and gave map makers a better idea of the landscape. So a lot of contributions. One of the most important voyages in American history, of all of history, world history, was Magellan's voyage. That looks pretty peaceful right there. There's a Strait of Magellan. It wasn't so peaceful when Magellan went through. Talk about Juan Ponce de Leon, some of these conquistadors that now are they're Spanish, or they're sailing for Spain, and they're looking for, gold, or a way through to get to the gold, a way through the continent to get to the gold. One of the guys given credit for discovering territory was Juan Ponce de Leon. He was looking for the Fountain of Youth. Obviously, it doesn't exist, or else I would have drank from the Fountain of Youth. And anybody who's seen me and all my missing hair and white hair, I never found it. But he did discover Florida. So Ponce de Leon, given credit for that. Francisco Coronado went exploring, looking for what they called the 7 cities of Cibola, which, once again, conquistadors looking for gold. And he's exploring in that territory. So he becomes the first to see the Colorado River. Hernando de Soto was the first European to see the Mississippi River, also looking for gold. These are conquistadors, and they want gold and power, and they want to bring back glory to their country, to Spain. Hernando Cortez captured the leader of the Aztecs, Montezuma. He heard stories about how amazing Tenochtitlan was, and the Aztecs, and all the gold that they could find there. So he was trying to go after that gold, and he did find it, and it's going to lead to the demise of the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs are going to die of the diseases that are brought over, as many of the Indians are. We'll go over that more in class. But Cortez defeats the Aztecs. They kill Montezuma. They take all the gold, and they knock down the capital at Tenochtitlan. Later on, the capital is rebuilt. It's Mexico City, in the same area. So the demise of the Aztecs. It was Francisco Pizarro who heard about the conquest of the Aztecs, and he heard about another tribe, so he said they must be there, and sure enough, it was. The Incas and their leader Atahualpa captured by the Spanish, and they took all their gold, and it led to the demise of the tribe, as well as they died for many of the European diseases that they had no immunity to. Let's get into a little bit, and for the first time here, English settlement. This is going to be the basis of this class, because they are going to settle in America. The English are. So the first Englishman, he wasn't even English, but he was sailing for the English, John Cabot. He was Italian. He's given permission by the English king to go over and look for the cities of Asia so they can go get gold. The year was 1497, and remember, it wasn't until 1501 when they found out that that's not Asia over there, that's a new territory. So he's looking for something that's not there, the rich cities of China. And he gets lost at sea. So the first venture by the English ended in tragedy, as John Cabot got lost at sea. Frenchmen that went out and sailed, we'll be getting into the French in the next chapter, but they're looking for the Northwest Passage. It's a guy by the name of Giovanni de Verrazano. He's going out 1524, so if you're putting things together here, you know that in 1501 they found out that it's new territory, so in 1524 they definitely knew that this was new territory. And so Verrazano is looking for some way up in the north to get through. They know that you can't get through in the middle. They know that Magellan didn't find anything in the south, so why not try the north? He's going up every river that he could, looking for a passage through the continent, a passage that we know is not there. He became the first European to see New York Harbor, which is very, very important. Jacques Cartier, you can see here his couple different voyages. He's sailing for the French and also looking for the Northwest Passage. He thinks that he found it, the St. Lawrence River. He goes up the St. Lawrence River, eventually gets to Quebec. What he does is he lays groundwork for French Empire in Canada. He's going to be the first to see Quebec, and he's going to later on there, about 70 years or so later, they're going to act on that, and they're finally going to set up a colony there. But he's the first to lay claim to that. Obviously, he didn't find any Northwest Passage because it doesn't exist. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. Thank you, and we'll go on to chapter 2.